The candlelight flickered across crystal glasses and meticulously plated hors d'oeuvres, reflecting off the polished silverware in a dance of soft golden glows. Stephanie moved through the room like she owned it, because, in a way, she did. Our home was her stage tonight, and she was putting on the performance of a lifetime. The dining room was full of laughter, a curated playlist humming gently in the background, the scent of her signature lavender vanilla candles wafting through every corner. I stood just behind her, close enough to smile for photos, but far enough to feel like I didn't belong in this version of our life. Our marriage is progressive, Stephanie declared with the kind of confidence that didn't invite disagreement, her voice lilting with faux humility and charm. We've moved beyond the constraints of monogamy. We're open, we're honest. We've grown. A few of the guests nodded politely, some curious, some skeptical. I caught the way Vanessa from her yoga class raised her brow slightly before sipping her wine. She wasn't buying it, but Stephanie didn't care. She was too busy being admired. "And you're okay with it?" someone asked, a man I didn't recognize, another one of her curated social imports. I swallowed a sip of my whiskey and nodded. "Yeah," I said simply. "It works for us." But that wasn't the truth. It wasn't that I didn't love Stephanie. We'd been married for 7 years. She was my lightning bolt, the woman I fell for during a gallery crawl in Chicago, high on wine and reckless youth. But lately, it felt like she'd been falling for herself, piece by piece, more than she had ever truly fallen for me. She wanted to feel alive, she'd said. Wanted something more raw, more real. "It's just sex," she had told me weeks ago as we lay in bed, her hand resting flat on my chest like a weight. "Not love. We're secure enough for this." I'd nodded then too, mostly out of loyalty, partly out of fear, because deep down, I wasn't sure who I was without her. Now, as the guests sipped champagne and she basked in their admiration like a queen regaling her court, I realized something. I wasn't her equal here. I was her prop, a symbol of her success at managing even the most radical idea of marriage. She spoke about freedom like it was a currency she had earned and distributed at will. She had chosen her partner weeks ago, some actor from her experimental theater group. I didn't even know his last name, but I saw the way she looked at him, even across the table tonight when he laughed too loudly at her stories. "So who would you choose?" Vanessa asked, her lips curling into a curious grin. "If you had to pick someone else, I mean. For fun." There it was, the question hanging in the air like smoke. I turned toward Stephanie, letting the silence drag for just a second too long. Her smile faltered, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I caught it. "I don't know," I said, my tone playful, masking the undercurrent of something harder. "Maybe someone unexpected. Someone powerful." "Oh." Stephanie's voice was just a touch too high, too sweet. "Who?" And that's when the idea took root. "Claire. My boss. 45, sharp, commanding. She didn't flinch around anyone, and she had the kind of presence that shifted rooms when she entered. She wasn't warm like Stephanie. She was fire and steel, and beneath it all, I suspected something more. I leaned into the table, catching the attention of everyone around. "Claire Harrington," I said smoothly. "My boss. CEO of Marwick and Holt." There was a brief silence, then an awkward laugh. "Wait, Claire." One of Stephanie's friends gasped. "The Ice Queen. Not exactly how I describe her," I said, still watching Stephanie. "She's intriguing." Stephanie's hand froze on her wine glass. Her knuckles turned slightly white. "That's ambitious," she said, trying to recover her smile. But the confidence in her voice had thinned. Later that night, after the last guests left and the silence returned, she turned to me as we cleaned up the dishes. "You were just trying to get a reaction, right?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes searching. I dried a wine glass slowly. "Not really," I said. "You told me to choose someone I was genuinely attracted to." She turned back to the sink, her jaw tightening just slightly. We didn't say anything else for a long while, but I could feel it. The shift. A small hairline fracture in the carefully crafted illusion she had built around our marriage. Her version of freedom had always come with an unspoken expectation that I would play the part, smile for the cameras, and never, ever outshine her. But now she wasn't so sure. And for the first time since we agreed to this madness, I wasn't so sure either. Maybe freedom looked different on me. The following Monday, the office hummed with its usual tempo, clicking keyboards, muted conference calls, the scent of burnt espresso lingering too long in the break room. But my mind wasn't on client briefs or deadlines. It kept drifting back to Saturday night, to Stephanie's forced smile when I said Claire's name, to the way her shoulders had tensed, like she was trying not to flinch. I told myself I wasn't doing it to punish her. That would have been too petty. But part of me liked that crack in her confidence. I arrived at the firm early, just after 7:30. Claire's corner office was already lit, of course. She was like that, always the first in, last out. The kind of woman who'd build her empire brick by brick, using intelligence sharper than most men could stomach and a ruthlessness that never needed to raise its voice. I brought coffee. 2 cups, hers exactly the way she liked it. Black, no sugar, hot enough to burn. She looked up as I knocked lightly and stepped in. "Morning," I said, setting the cup down on the edge of her desk. Claire tilted her head, appraising me in that way that always made me stand a little straighter. She didn't soften when she liked someone. She just paid attention. It made her approval feel earned. "You're early. So are you." Her lips twitched. Not a smile. Something more dangerous. "Thank you for the coffee." There was a pause. The air between us held just a little more static than usual. Maybe it was the fact that I'd said her name with such boldness 2 nights ago. Maybe I wanted to test the waters and see if she had heard about it. She hadn't said a word, but she didn't need to. That same day, after our leadership meeting, she asked me to stay behind. Everyone else filed out, and the door clicked closed behind them. "I've got a fundraiser this Thursday," she said, her voice low and composed. "Some big clients will be there. I'd like you to come with me." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why?" Claire leaned back in her chair, folding her arms under her chest. Her blouse clung to her just enough to reveal the subtle, tone definition beneath it. She always dressed sharp, crisp lines, bold jewelry, not an inch of softness in sight. But now I was seeing something else. "You're good with people," she said, "and I think you've got potential. Besides, I could use someone interesting on my arm for once." There it was. Not flirtation. Not yet. But something had shifted. I didn't hesitate. "I'm in." She smiled, not coyly, not sweetly. It was a real smile. A rare thing. Thursday came fast. Stephanie didn't ask where I was going. She had a dinner with one of her new friends from the acting collective, some wiry artist type who wore scarves in the summer and smelled like cloves. Our openness had morphed into something passive-aggressive now. We didn't ask questions because the answers might force honesty neither of us was ready for. I dressed in a navy suit, clean shave, slick back hair. Claire picked me up in a black car, of course she did, and when I slid into the leather seat beside her, she paused. "You clean up well." "So do you." She did more than clean up. She was radiant. A black, sleeveless dress hugged her frame like it had been sculpted for her, low in the back, high at the collarbone, with just enough skin to hint, not promise. Her scent was something expensive and dry, amber, musk, a faint whisper of tobacco leaf. Not a floral note in the mix. It was unapologetically sensual. The fundraiser was at a private gallery downtown. White walls, hanging lights, overpriced wine in narrow glasses. Claire moved through the crowd with ease, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her body brushing against mine just enough to make me aware of every inch of her. I watched the way people looked at her, powerful men trying not to fumble their words, their wives watching me, curious. Jealous, even. Because I was the man on Claire Harrington's arm. And she wasn't just using me for show. We talked, we laughed, genuinely. Between quiet moments of art critique and whispered observations about the absurdity of wealth, we found something that didn't feel like strategy. There was a point where she leaned in to tell me something, some ridiculous story about a client's mistress demanding a 4% stake in a biotech merger as emotional compensation, and as she laughed, her hand stayed on my chest just a second longer than necessary. I felt it, the buzz under my skin. Later, we stood out on the rooftop terrace, the night air cool against our flushed skin. Below, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Around us, champagne glasses clinked and the stars blinked through thin clouds. Claire turned toward me, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "This arrangement you mentioned at dinner. With your wife. The open marriage." I didn't flinch. "What about it? Do you actually want it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "No," I said. "Not really." Claire nodded, turning back toward the skyline. "Good," she said. "Neither would I." And then, slowly, deliberately, she reached out and slid her fingers into mine. Not possessive. Not tentative. Just there. Warm. Certain. And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just sex. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't performance. It was connection. The real kind. The kind Stephanie never expected me to find. The kind that scared me, because it felt honest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something break open in me, not pain, not anger. Just the ache of something new, something I hadn't felt in years. Desire. And this time, it wasn't just physical. It was dangerous. It was real. The first time Claire and I had sex, it wasn't planned. There was no grand seduction, no dramatic undressing, no champagne trail leading to a hotel suite or whispered admissions of guilt. It happened 2 weeks after the fundraiser, on a rainy Thursday night in our office, under the pale glow of desk lamps and the soft rumble of thunder. We'd stayed late, as we often did now. The pretense was always work. Revisions to the Wilson account. Strategy for the Maynard pitch. There was always something to keep us in that glass-walled sanctuary after everyone else had gone. The air between us had grown denser with every passing evening. Conversations drifted from professional to personal, peppered with shared confessions and the kind of laughter that only came when guards started to fall. Her wit was sharp, but layered with a softness that felt reserved just for me. And the way she looked at me, like I was a man who mattered, lit up something inside I didn't realize I'd left in the dark. That night, after hours of reviewing slides for an upcoming investor meeting, she stood behind me at her desk, leaning in to peer at my screen. Her perfume, earthy, dark, lingered just below my jaw. She reached past me, her hand brushing my shoulder, and murmured, "You always think 3 steps ahead. That's why I wanted you on this." I turned to look up at her, and her face was closer than I expected, close enough that I could see the flecks of green in her otherwise steely eyes. She didn't back away. Neither did I. It wasn't a kiss that started it. It was her hand on my collar, fingers slowly straightening it as if she was fixing something. Then resting. Then curling. A silence stretched out between us, one long, charged pause, and when it finally broke, it was with her lips barely brushing mine, tentative but hungry. The dam broke. I stood, wrapping one hand around her waist and the other behind her neck, and we kissed like we'd been waiting years for it. There was no hesitation, no need to ask for permission. Our mouths moved together with purpose, our breath quickening as hands explored without shame. We didn't make it to the couch. Instead, she half sat, half climbed onto her desk, sending a few neatly stacked files fluttering to the floor. I stood between her legs, her heels digging into my back as I kissed the side of her throat, her blouse coming undone beneath my fingers. She pulled at my belt with impatience, and when we finally came together, there was no slow build, just release. Urgent, raw, almost desperate. It was sex, yes, but it didn't feel like an affair. It felt like something else, like a home I didn't know I'd been missing. The next morning, Stephanie commented that I looked rested. We sat in our kitchen in that strange, familiar silence that had come to define our mornings. She poured almond milk into her coffee, scrolling through her phone without meeting my eyes. "Your boss really has you working hard," she said absently. I didn't answer. Because yes, Claire had me working harder than anyone had in years. Just not in the way Stephanie assumed. That weekend, Stephanie asked if I was interested in trying something new with a couple she'd met at her improv group. "They're both married, but, you know," she said, stirring her tea, "they've done this kind of thing before. It could be exciting." I looked at her, really looked, and realized for the first time that this was all just performance for her. This progressive marriage, this openness, it was theater. And I was her scene partner, her emotional safety net, the man she could rely on to play along so she could say she was evolved, fearless, desired. But she didn't see me. Not really. She hadn't in a long time. "Maybe," I replied, sipping my coffee. That was the moment I knew I was lying to her, not just with omission, but with my presence. I was physically in our marriage, but emotionally miles away, floating farther with every hour I spent with Claire. Claire and I started meeting outside the office. Quiet bars. Hotel lobbies. That beautiful, private cabin she owned in the hills west of the city. She never called them dates, and I never asked what this was between us. We didn't need definitions. But somewhere between the third night in her cabin, where we'd cooked dinner together, shared stories from childhood, and ended the evening tangled in blankets on the floor, in the morning she reached over, kissed my forehead, and said, "I feel like I can breathe when I'm with you." Something changed. It wasn't just about sex anymore. Not even close. She knew how to touch me, not just my body, but the raw, unguarded parts of me I'd buried in compromise. She asked questions Stephanie never did. She remembered the name of my first dog. She wanted to know the things that kept me up at night. and I wanted to tell her. One night, as we lay in her bed with the city lights painting streaks of gold across our skin, she traced a line along my ribcage and asked softly, "Does your wife know you're lonely?" I didn't answer. Because yes, she did. And she didn't care. Back at home, things were shifting. Stephanie had stopped making suggestions. She didn't bring up the couple again. She didn't flirt the way she used to with her theater flings. She stopped pretending. Because she saw it now. The change. The light in my eyes when I walked through the door. The calm that wasn't forced. The occasional, involuntary smile that crossed my face when I checked my phone. Claire was seeping into me, slowly but surely. And Stephanie, who had thought she could control the openness, curate the boundaries, direct the scenes, was starting to realize something terrifying. She wasn't the main character anymore. And she couldn't handle it. Stephanie didn't bring it up right away. For weeks after the fundraiser, she played her part. Smiling. Floating. Still hosting her wine nights and weekend brunches, still name-dropping actors and progressive authors she'd never finish reading. But I knew her too well. The longer she didn't ask about Claire, the more certain I was that she was obsessed. I caught her one night sitting on the edge of our bed with her laptop open, her screen angled slightly away. She didn't notice me watching as her fingers flew across the keys, her face taut, eyes narrowed. I caught a glimpse of Claire's name at the top of the browser. LinkedIn. Some blog post Claire had written years ago about leadership and intuition. I said nothing, because I wanted her to sit with that. The irony of it all was that Stephanie had encouraged this, had pushed for this. She was the one who told me we should open the marriage. She was the one who insisted sex could be separate from emotion. It's just the body, not the heart, she said one night months ago, curled on the couch with a glass of Pinot and her legs thrown across mine. But she never expected me to find someone like Claire. Someone who didn't just fuck me, but saw me. It wasn't until we were driving back from a mutual friend's housewarming party, a night that had been painfully awkward with her clinging to my arm like a second skin, that she finally broke. The silence in the car was loaded. Stephanie stared out the window, her jaw tight, her fingers drumming on the armrest. "Are you seeing her?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the hum of tires on asphalt. I didn't answer right away. "She's my boss," I said, watching the road. "That's not what I asked." I sighed, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "You wanted this. You said. I didn't think you'd fall for someone like her." Her voice cracked at the edge of her words, tiny, trembling fissures in the carefully controlled tone she usually weaponized so well. "She's cold," Stephanie went on, laughing bitterly. "Detached. She wears suits like armor and talks like a press release. That's who you want now." I pulled the car over. Turned to her. "She's not cold, Steph. She's honest. With herself. With me. Something you haven't been in a long time." The words stung more than I meant them to, but I didn't walk them back. I couldn't. Stephanie shook her head, blinking rapidly. "So this is real, then? You're, what, in love with her?" That question hung in the air like smoke. "I don't know," I said, my voice low. "But what I have with her, it's not pretend." Stephanie didn't respond. She just stared at the windshield, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. We drove home in silence. The next few days were filled with the kind of fragile politeness that couples used to hide a bomb ticking under the surface. We exchanged pleasantries. We cooked dinner. We asked about each other's day. But the tension in the air made every touch, every word feel like a lie. Then came the night of her dinner party. Another performance. Another illusion. She wore a red silk dress, low-backed and risky for someone who once claimed, "Elegance is restraint." Her makeup was flawless, her laughter too loud, her stories about our marriage just a little too glowing. To the outside world, we were fine. Better than fine. "We've just learned how to evolve," she told her guests, smiling over a glass of champagne. "Intimacy doesn't have to look like it used to." Her friends clinked glasses. I smiled through gritted teeth. But Claire's name never came up. Not once. She couldn't say it out loud. And that silence said more than anything else. Later that night, after everyone left and the candles had burned halfway down to wax puddles, Stephanie stood barefoot in the kitchen, her dress unzipped halfway as she poured the last of the wine into her glass. Her eyes were glassy, her lips trembling, not from alcohol, but from something deeper. "You embarrassed me," she said softly, her back to me. "What?" "At dinner. You weren't present. You didn't even look at me." "I looked at you," I said, taking a slow step closer. "And I saw someone who's still pretending this is all a game she can control." Stephanie turned, her voice cracking. "This isn't how it was supposed to go. You were supposed to explore, sure, but not connect. Not like this. She dropped into one of the bar stools, cradling her glass. I just wanted us to be ahead of the curve. I wanted us to be that couple everyone envied. So we're a brand now? I asked, half laughing. Is that what this was about for you? I didn't expect to lose you. She looked up at me finally, really looked. And for the first time in what felt like years, I saw the real her beneath all the curated confidence. Vulnerable. Frightened. Crumbling. I didn't mean to push you away, she whispered. I stepped forward, not to comfort her, but to be clear. You didn't just push me, Steph. You walked me to the edge and dared me to jump. And I did. A long silence. Then, barely audible, she said, I want to close it again. The marriage. I don't want this anymore. I let that sit between us. I don't think you get to unring that bell. Her eyes filled with tears. So that's it. I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not sure I want to come back to something that only works if I'm always playing your version of me. She stood abruptly, wine glass clinking against the counter. You're choosing her over us? No, I said. I'm choosing me for the first time in years. Stephanie stood frozen for a long moment before storming down the hall, her heels clicking angrily against the tile. The door to the bedroom slammed behind her a second later, and I just stood there, surrounded by the remnants of a dinner party that no longer meant anything. Because the truth was simple now. The facade was broken, and nothing we had could survive in the light that now poured through those cracks. It started small. A sideways glance in the hallway. A smirk that lasted too long. The slight hush that fell when I walked into a room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Offices like ours thrive on gossip, the high-stakes world of finance mixed with just enough pent-up ego to make even the smallest rumors grow legs. But this was different. This wasn't the usual talk about bonuses or departmental reorgs. They were talking about Claire and me. It was the way Melissa from HR looked at me when I passed her desk. The way Devin, one of the junior analysts, smiled knowingly when I mentioned I had a late meeting with Claire. Like I was part of some office legend now, only this one came with whispers behind closed doors. At work, things were no longer clean lines and structured authority. Now everything felt like it had layers. Claire and I had tried to keep our connection discreet. She never once acted differently in meetings, never gave any public indication of favoritism or flirtation. But people noticed. The extra time we spent together. The lingering eye contact. The quiet lunches that lasted just a little too long. And Stephanie? She'd begun to lash out in small, cutting ways. Passive-aggressive texts. Subtle jabs in conversation. Don't forget to tell your boss good night, too, she said once as I kissed her cheek on the way out the door. Or is she tucking you in herself these days? The sarcasm bit harder each time. What she didn't know was that Claire and I hadn't slept together again since that first night in her office. We hadn't needed to. There was a gravity between us now that ran deeper than sex, something emotional, something intimate that didn't require the physical to validate it. But that just made it worse. Because I was starting to feel more seen in those quiet, shared moments with Claire than I ever had in the years of comfortable, performative routine with Stephanie. At home, the atmosphere was unbearable. Stephanie's guilt had morphed into volatility. One moment she was attempting tenderness, suggesting vacations, asking to go out for dinner, touching my hand across the table like old times. The next, she was snapping, accusing me of emotional abandonment, of running away with someone who didn't even know me the way she did. You think Claire loves you? She asked one night, pacing our living room barefoot, wine in hand. She doesn't. She loves the idea of you. Just like she probably loved the idea of every man before you. You don't know her, I said flatly. And she doesn't know you. I didn't respond. Because Claire did know me. She knew about my childhood. The scars I never mentioned. My fear of becoming irrelevant. She remembered details, asked questions, gave space when needed, and presence when I didn't know I needed it. Stephanie used to do that. But that was a long time ago. Now, her emotions had turned into performance art, crying without tears, arguments without substance, pleas without sincerity. I didn't say it out loud, but I had begun to resent her for forcing us down this path. She lit the match. She just never expected to get burned. At the office, things reached a boiling point during a monthly strategy meeting. I was presenting next quarter's development roadmap when I noticed Claire watching me with that quiet, measured look she always wore in public, admiring, but unreadable to anyone who didn't know her. I felt grounded in it. Until the meeting adjourned and Thomas, a senior VP who never had a kind word for anyone under 40, clapped me on the back and whispered, I see why the Ice Queen's been melting lately. I froze. He walked away chuckling, unaware of or maybe entirely aware of, the line he just crossed. Claire saw the interaction but said nothing until later, when we were alone in her office. "People are talking," she said, her eyes cool but not unkind. "I know," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Do you want to stop?" she asked. The question didn't carry anger. It wasn't a trap, just a choice. I thought for a long moment before answering. "No, but I also don't want this to ruin what you've built, or what I'm trying to become." She nodded slowly. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she looked down at her hands. "I've worked too hard to let whispers define me. But you don't deserve to get pulled under because of me." "I'm not under," I said. "Not yet." She looked up at me again, something unspoken in her eyes. Something like fear, but also trust. At home that night, Stephanie was waiting in the living room. No wine this time. No dramatics. Just silence. And then, softly, "I don't want to do this anymore." She didn't mean the fighting. She meant the marriage. I thought I could be the kind of woman who allowed more. Who didn't need ownership to feel secure, she said, her voice tight with shame. But I was wrong. I can't be that woman. And I hate what this has done to me. To you. For a moment, all I could feel was relief. And then guilt. Because I'd already started leaving long before she said the words. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. But not in the way she needed. "Do you love her?" she asked quietly. "I don't know. But I wanted to. More than anything." The next day, Claire passed me a folder across her desk, but her fingers brushed mine, lingered, and in that touch was everything we weren't saying. She looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" I nodded. She tilted her head, that signature calm in her voice. "We're getting close to something. You feel it too, don't you?" "Yes," I whispered. And I did. The ground beneath my life was shifting. And even though everything felt uncertain, for once, I didn't want to run. It was late on a Tuesday evening when Claire and I ended up in her apartment again. We hadn't planned on it. We both stayed late to finalize a presentation for the board. Tension had hung in the air for hours, not the kind bred of stress or fatigue, but the kind that had become familiar between us. That low, electric hum beneath conversation. The small glances held too long. The occasional brush of her fingers as she passed me a document, her touch lingering just a second too long. When the presentation was done and the office had gone quiet, she asked, "Want to grab a drink?" "Somewhere quiet." I followed her out without saying a word. And hours later, I found myself on her balcony, the skyline of the city glittering behind her like a stage set, her silhouette leaning against the railing, barefoot, with a glass of wine dangling from her fingertips. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked, eyes fixed on the lights beyond us. "All the time," I said. "Like actually starting over. Wiping the slate." I hesitated, my thumb grazing the rim of my own glass. "Only if it's with the right person." That made her glance over her shoulder. There was a beat, long enough to hear the sounds of the city below, muffled and distant. Then she said, "I could help you, if that's what you want." I turned toward her. "Help me how?" She stepped closer. "Help you find the version of you that's not weighed down by what you think you owe everyone else." And there it was. She'd always seen through me. Not just to the part of me that wanted her, but to the part that didn't want to pretend anymore. "I don't know who that version is yet," I admitted. She touched my chest lightly. "That's the point. You don't have to know. You just have to want to find him." Back home, Stephanie was unraveling. She'd become unpredictable, flipping between desperate affection and volcanic rage. She texted me earlier that night, "Come home. Please. I just want to talk." I hadn't responded. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't have the energy to comfort the version of her who had created this mess and then resented me for following her lead. When I did get home the next morning, she was already awake, sitting on the edge of our bed like she'd been waiting for hours. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She didn't cry anymore. She seethed. "So is she your savior now?" she asked. "That's what Claire is? Your fucking emotional rehab?" I didn't rise to it. "You're not mad I'm with her," I said. "You're mad that I chose someone who wasn't you." Stephanie stood up, pacing like a storm about to break loose. "I gave you freedom. You took it and ran off like a teenager." "No," I said. "You gave me a script. One where you stayed in control. You just didn't expect me to improvise." That was the moment it broke. Stephanie turned, voice raw. "I hate her. I hate what she represents. You're not the same anymore." "No," I said quietly. "I'm not. You think she cares about you." She snapped. "Once you're not new and exciting anymore, she'll toss you aside like everyone else. She's never treated me like a trophy. Neither did I." I looked at her. Really looked. Yes, you did. You loved the version of me that fit into your curated world. The plus one. The doting, loyal husband who smiled through everything. You loved the image of us. Her mouth trembled. I loved you, she whispered. I nodded. Maybe you did. But somewhere along the way, you started loving the brand more. She turned away, shoulders heaving in silence. I didn't follow. I couldn't play the role anymore. The next day, Claire found me in the conference room before our staff check-in. She closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and looked at me for a long moment. You okay? I nodded, though I didn't feel it. Tell me anyway, she said. I exhaled. I told her the truth. That we're not coming back from this. Claire's face was unreadable. You sure? I looked at her. Yes. She stepped closer, her voice low. She's going to say I manipulated you. That I pulled you away. That I made you feel things you didn't want to feel. She already has. And do you believe her? I took a slow step forward, close enough to feel the heat of her body. No. You didn't make me feel anything. You just gave me permission to admit I already did. She touched my face, barely a graze, and whispered, You're getting stronger. Not strong enough yet. That's okay, she said. You're not alone. For the first time in months, I felt steady. Not because of what she said, but because she didn't try to save me, she stood beside me while I saved myself. That night, Stephanie blew up. She called me 6 times, then left a voicemail so unhinged I had to sit down to listen to it. Her voice tore through my headphones, crying, yelling, accusing Claire of ruining her marriage, her reputation, her vision of what our life was supposed to be. She's nothing. Stephanie screamed through the speaker. She's a cold bitch who fucked her way to the top, and now she's going to take you and leave you with nothing, too. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. That version of Stephanie, the one who needed to be seen through the eyes of others, was breaking, and she had no idea how to be without that mirror. I ended up at Claire's again that night, not because I needed her body, but because I needed a place that didn't demand an apology for who I was becoming. We didn't sleep together. We lay side by side, her fingers resting lightly on my chest, her breath steady against my skin. You ever regret any of this? I asked into the dark. Sometimes, she said softly, but not for the reasons you think. I waited. I regret that it had to hurt so much for you to get here. I swallowed hard. Maybe I needed the pain. She kissed my shoulder, and we didn't say anything else. Because that's what happens when you find the person who sees you through the storm. You don't need to perform anymore. You just breathe. Together. I don't know what I expected from that morning. Maybe silence. Or a note. Maybe she'd be gone entirely, left for her sisters in Vermont, or her therapist's office, or just somewhere far enough that she wouldn't have to watch this unfold. But Stephanie was in the kitchen, barefoot, pouring coffee like it was any other Wednesday. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Didn't speak. She just stood there in that robe I bought her for our 5th anniversary, the one she said was too soft to wear, her hair pulled up in a messy twist that looked more haunted than chic. I leaned against the doorframe and waited. She finally broke the silence without turning around. You slept at her place again. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. There was no point anymore. She turned, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed tight across her chest, the coffee forgotten beside her. You've made your choice, haven't you? I wanted to be gentle. I wanted to ease her down from whatever edge she was walking. But something in me had hardened. Not in cruelty. In clarity. Yes, I said. She stared at me for a long moment. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the unbearable rage of being replaced, of being wrong, of losing control over a story she thought she had authored from the first page. I gave you permission to explore, she said, her voice trembling, brittle. But that wasn't an invitation to leave. You didn't give me anything, I replied, stepping into the room. You gave yourself freedom. You assumed I'd just keep orbiting you no matter how far you drifted. She laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound. You're so self-righteous now. So enlightened. What is she feeding you? Lines from feminist leadership blogs? Whispering how special you are between bites of kale? I didn't rise to it. You don't know her. And you don't know me anymore. That, I didn't deny. Because it was true. The woman in front of me wasn't the one I fell in love with in that cramped bookstore years ago. The woman who used to write poetry in the margins of her textbooks, who danced barefoot in the kitchen at 2 a.m., who once cried watching a documentary about whales. That woman had been gone for years. Maybe she grew out of that skin. Maybe she just put on so many layers to impress the world that she forgot what it felt like to be seen naked, emotionally, I mean. Now, she wore image like armor. And I couldn't love a projection anymore. I'm filing, she said suddenly, her voice flat. I didn't flinch. Okay. Her jaw tightened. She wasn't expecting me to accept it so easily. Maybe she thought I'd beg, or at least pause. But I had nothing left to argue for. No script left to read from. So that's it, she snapped. You're just walking away? After everything we've built? I stepped closer, not out of threat, but out of respect. I wanted her to hear this, not as a lover or even as a husband, but as a man who finally found his voice. We didn't build this, Stephanie. We curated it. We staged it. And somewhere along the way, we forgot to actually live inside it. I let the silence settle before continuing. You asked me to choose. And I am. She scoffed. Of course you're choosing her. No, I said. I'm choosing me. Claire just happens to be the one who reminded me I was worth choosing. Claire didn't say much when I told her. She simply opened the door to her apartment, let me in, and closed it softly behind us. I told her, I said. And? She asked, setting her phone on the counter, her eyes fixed on me. She's filing. Claire nodded. There was no smile. No gloating. Just quiet understanding. You okay? I sat down on her couch, suddenly aware of how heavy my limbs felt. I don't know. She walked over, sat beside me, and took my hand without speaking. Her touch was steady, warm. Do you want this? She asked. Divorce? No, she said. This. Us. Me. Not as a fantasy. As something real. I looked at her, at the strength in her eyes, the vulnerability just beneath. Yes, I said. I want the version of my life that doesn't feel like a constant performance. Claire exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath since the day we met. Then we'll build that. Slowly. Carefully. No roles. No scripts. Just like that. No grand declarations. No fireworks. Just the promise of something real. Stephanie didn't go quietly. In the days that followed, she tried everything: guilt, manipulation, even kindness. She left notes. She sent photos from the past. She reminded me of trips we took, books we shared, songs we once danced to at 2 a.m. And I mourned those moments. Truly. But love isn't a scrapbook. And I was tired of trying to glue myself back into a version of the past that didn't fit anymore. When she showed up at my office unannounced, Claire was the one who intercepted her. I didn't know about it until afterward. Claire simply walked into my office, closed the door, and said she was here. My stomach dropped. What happened? She accused me of stealing her husband, of ruining her image, of sabotaging her story. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm sorry. Claire stepped closer. Don't be. What did you say to her? I told her the truth, Claire said calmly. That you were never hers to keep. That she lost you long before I ever touched you. There was a long pause. Then, Claire whispered, she hates me. She hates herself more. Claire nodded, as if that pain wasn't new to her. She's not going to let this be clean, I said. No, Claire agreed. But we will be. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about choosing someone else. This was about finally choosing honesty, even when it cost everything. Stephanie had always been a master of appearances. Dinner parties, curated social media posts, the effortless elegance she projected when walking into a room. She could spin anything. Our life together was part of that illusion, woven tightly around dinner tables and couples retreats, filtered photos and filtered conversations. But when everything finally collapsed, it wasn't with a bang. It was with the slow unraveling of a woman who realized her audience was no longer clapping. It began at brunch. She met with her friends, 3 women she'd known since her days in theater school, all of them equally obsessed with status and aesthetics. Normally, they'd hang on her every word, eager to soak in the latest progressive revelation she could serve with her bottomless mimosa. But this time, something was different. One of them, Alyssa, asked the question, "So, how's the open marriage going now?" And Stephanie cracked. She didn't mean to. I'm sure she wanted to spin it, to turn the narrative back in her favor. But under the weight of her own exhaustion, the act finally slipped. I made a mistake, she whispered into her glass. The table went quiet. I thought I was being modern, bold. I thought, if I let him go a little, he'd stay. That I'd look brave for offering freedom. And, Alyssa asked carefully, I lost him. She laughed, bitter and breathless. I lost him to someone who wasn't afraid to actually feel. No one responded right away. Later, I heard about it secondhand, from a friend of a friend who'd been there, who texted me. She broke down. She actually said she admired Claire. Said you looked happy. Real. said she never expected to be the one left behind. And that's when I knew. Stephanie finally understood. Not just what she'd done, but what she'd cost herself. Meanwhile, Claire didn't push. In the days following the fallout, she didn't ask for more than I could give. She didn't push for declarations or romantic certainty. She gave me space, structure, steadiness. She helped me find an apartment, small, quiet, close to the firm but far enough from the old life that it didn't haunt me. She offered to help with the logistics of the separation, lawyers, paperwork, financial breakdowns, but always asked, "Do you want this from me as your partner or as your friend?" And that's what made it so different. She didn't rescue me. She walked beside me. She never tried to hold my pain for me, but she never let me carry it alone, either. One night, as I packed a final box from the old house, she sat cross-legged on the floor of my new place, sipping wine from a paper cup while watching me sort through the last of my things. "You okay?" she asked, that same gentle steadiness in her voice. "Not really," I admitted. She didn't flinch. "Good. Means you're not numbing it anymore." I laughed, hollow and grateful. I forgot how to feel anything for a while. Claire met my eyes. "You didn't forget. You just spent too long pretending." I crossed the room, sat beside her. "What if I'm still pretending even now?" She tilted her head, brushed a thumb across my jaw. "Then keep pretending until it feels real again. I'll still be here when it does." The final confrontation with Stephanie was quieter than I expected. We met at the lawyer's office to sign the separation agreement. Her face was drawn, but composed. She looked like someone who had spent weeks crying in private and was now clinging to whatever pride remained. "I'm not going to drag this out," she said. "We've already lost enough." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Thank you." She hesitated before leaving. "I did love you, you know," she said. "I know," I replied. "I loved you too." Another pause. She almost smiled. "But not like you love her." I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. That night, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city breathe beneath me. Lights flickered like tiny heartbeats. Somewhere down the block, music played softly from an open window, jazz, smoky and low. Claire joined me, arms wrapped around her chest, hair pulled back, barefoot and beautiful without trying to be. She leaned against the railing beside me, quiet for a while. Then she said, "You did it. It doesn't feel like victory." "That's because it's not." She turned to me, her expression soft. "It's freedom. It just happens to hurt like hell at first." I reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. We stood like that for a long time. No words. No performance. Just the silence of a life finally free of illusion. And the beginning of something real. The first morning in my new apartment was silent. No clattering dishes. No podcast murmuring from the kitchen. No passive-aggressive sighs or the rustle of silk ropes. Just stillness. I stood by the window with a mug of black coffee. No cream, no sugar, just something bitter and real. The city stretched before me like a living thing, humming softly, pulsing with the promise of everything I hadn't yet figured out. This wasn't freedom the way I once imagined it. No wild bachelor renaissance, no champagne-fueled nights or reckless abandon. This was quieter, more sober, more grounded. A kind of freedom that didn't taste like revenge but like exhale. Claire came by around 10, dressed down in jeans and a soft white sweater, her hair in a loose ponytail that somehow made her even more captivating. She carried a stack of folders, a bottle of fresh-pressed juice, and the steady calm that had anchored me for weeks now. "I brought divorce armor," she said with a half-smile, holding up a manila folder labeled with my name. "Finances, housing forms, change of address packets. Thought I'd make your first Monday of independence feel productive." I smiled. It wasn't romantic. It was practical. And right now, that was exactly what I needed. We sat at the tiny breakfast bar, her laptop open, her legs crossed under her like she'd lived here for years. She never tried to take over my space. She just made it easier to exist in. "This part sucks," she said, pointing to the alimony clause. "But it's clean. No surprises. No bitterness." "She gave up the house," I said. That surprised me. Claire shrugged. Maybe she didn't want to live in a museum of mistakes. That stuck with me. Because our house had become that. A gallery of curated memories built on the foundation of who we were pretending to be. Now, I had 4 rooms and a view that didn't lie. I'd take that. Stephanie and I didn't talk for weeks. She kept her word. No drama. No backtracking. The papers moved swiftly. Our mutual friends took their sides silently, some drifting toward her orbit, others cautiously checking in with me under the radar. I didn't blame anyone. We were both radioactive in different ways. Then, one afternoon, I got a text. "Stephanie, can we meet?" "No drama. I promise." We met at a small cafe tucked into the edge of the park, a place we used to go when we first moved to the city, before everything became filtered and manicured. She looked different. Tired, but less performative. Her hair was tied back loosely, her clothes simple. No makeup. No armor. She looked like someone real for the first time in years. "I've started seeing someone," she said, not looking at me. It surprised me. Not because I didn't expect it, but because it wasn't said to provoke. "Good," I said. "Is it serious?" She shook her head. "No, but he's kind. And quiet. I think that's what I need right now." I nodded. There was a long pause. Then she said it. "I'm sorry. For everything. For trying to make you into a version of a husband that matched the life I wanted to show off." I waited. "I think I love the idea of being admired more than I love being known," she said, voice soft. "And I'm sorry for not seeing you. Really seeing you." The words didn't undo anything, but they mattered. They were the first real thing she'd said to me in a long, long time. "I'm sorry, too," I replied, "for staying too long in something that neither of us could admit wasn't working." We didn't cry. We didn't hug. There was no Hollywood ending. But we parted with something better than forgiveness, mutual understanding. Sometimes, the most honest closure doesn't end with a kiss or a handshake. Sometimes, it's just letting go without needing to justify why. Claire and I didn't rush anything. Even after the dust settled, we kept our rhythm steady, dinners a few nights a week, the occasional weekend getaway. Her place, my place. No expectations. Just space for something new to bloom. She once told me that she'd been afraid to fall in love again. That power made people nervous. That being a woman at the top made her feel like any vulnerability would be weaponized. "I wasn't looking for soft," she said one night as we lay in bed, the lamp casting a golden hue across the room. "But you made me want it again." Quiet moments. Coffee on a balcony. Fingers laced under the table. "I wasn't looking for anyone," I replied, brushing her hair back from her face. "But you made me remember that there's a difference between being alone and being lonely." We weren't perfect, but we were real. And real, I'd learned, was so much better than perfect. On the day the divorce finalized, I didn't feel broken. I felt still, like something had been lifted from my chest. Claire met me at a small bar that evening. We clinked glasses, not to celebrate an ending, but to honor a beginning. "To the truth," she said. "To never hiding from it again," I answered. And we drank to that. No fanfare. No Instagram-worthy moment. Just two people, finding something honest in a world full of filters. I looked at her that night and realized. This wasn't just a rebound. It wasn't a reaction to the pain. Claire wasn't just the woman I ran to. She was the one I chose, after I remembered how to choose myself first. I didn't realize how heavy the mask had been until I finally stopped wearing it. It wasn't just the marriage, or the illusion of the open relationship. It wasn't just the forced smiles at dinner parties, the curated photos on vacations where we didn't even touch. It was the quiet suffocation of performing, day after day, for a life that had lost its meaning. And now? Now the air tasted different. It wasn't freedom in the wild, reckless way Stephanie used to romanticize. It wasn't sexual exploration or philosophical reinvention. It was the simple freedom of waking up next to someone and not having to pretend. Claire and I didn't become a headline. There were no rings, no public declarations, no parade of milestones to check off. What we had didn't come with rules. It came with presence. With peace. Sometimes that meant reading quietly in the same room. Other times, it meant impromptu road trips with nothing but a duffel bag and a playlist of songs that made us feel 16 again. We argued, sure. We disagreed. We triggered each other. But it was different. There was no scorekeeping, no strategic silence. We fought because we cared, and we stayed because the connection wasn't conditional. It was real. One morning, as we lay in bed, the sunlight just beginning to creep across the floor, Claire turned to me with that calm she carried like second skin. "Do you ever miss her?" she asked softly. I knew what she meant. Stephanie. The life we had. The version of me I used to be. I thought about it for a moment. "I don't miss the marriage," I said. "But I do miss the version of myself that thought love was supposed to be about endurance." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't think it is?" "Not in the way we were doing it. We were surviving each other." "That's not the same as loving." Claire nodded. "No, it's not." I turned toward her. "What about you?" You ever miss the version of you that didn't let people in? She smiled soft, real. Sometimes, she said. She was easier to protect, but she was also very, very lonely. We lay there in silence, the morning stretching out in that sacred, quiet way that lovers understand, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Stephanie and I eventually found something like peace. We still passed each other in the city now and then, at mutual friends' gatherings, at the occasional gallery showing she still insisted on attending. We even shared a drink once, purely accidental. No hostility, no flirtation, just two people who had outgrown each other. She seemed better, softer, somehow. She'd started working for a nonprofit, teaching theater to kids in underserved schools. She wore less makeup now, laughed more naturally. When I saw her, I didn't feel anger or longing, just a kind of wistful acknowledgement. We had loved each other once. But the truth was our marriage had been a well-decorated prison, and we both had to break it open to learn how to breathe again. There was one night, months later, when Claire and I were out at a quiet dinner on the coast, sipping wine by the window while the waves crashed just beyond the glass. She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "I love this," she said. This us, she said. No audience, no script, just honesty. I squeezed her hand gently. "I spent years building a life that looked perfect from the outside," I said. "But this, right here, is the first time it's ever felt like mine." She smiled, and I knew we'd both arrived at something we hadn't dared to name before. Peace. Not the peace that comes from escape. The kind that comes from alignment. From living as we are, not as we're expected to be. If you're reading this, maybe you're in the middle of it yourself. Maybe you're wondering if staying silent is loyalty or if leaving is selfish. Maybe you've convinced yourself that playing a role is easier than disappointing the audience. Let me tell you this. The world doesn't need your perfect marriage. It needs your honest one, or your honest breakup, or your honest self, even if that means starting from zero. Don't settle for love that only works on paper. Don't become a supporting character in someone else's performance. You owe it to yourself to live a life you don't have to rehearse for. For me, it took losing the illusion to find the truth. And now? Now I wake up beside someone who loves the man behind the curtain. No stage, no spotlight, just me. And that's more than enough.